Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. Now, at about this time on the show, I normally introduce a guest, and I do my best anyway to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about, and then we jump into the conversation. But that's not what's going to happen today. This is going to be a little bit different. Today, I would like to take a few minutes just to introduce myself, tell you a little bit about my story, how I got involved in the geospatial industry, maybe why I started the podcast, the things I've learned along the way, and at the end of the show, I just have a few sort of housekeeping messages I'd like to share with you. So if you've been following along for the last few episodes, or even from the start for that matter, you might have noticed one or more of three things. Firstly, I have an accent. It sounds like I know a little bit about geospatial, or I have a geospatial background, and I am also clearly new to podcasting. So I thought I'd start with those three things there and sort of give you a little bit of a background about my story, where I come from and why I'm doing this. Okay, so let's start with my accent. I come from New Zealand. I can prove that New Zealand exists, even though it doesn't always appear on every world map. It's my home, it's where I come from, it exists. Trust me on this. So I was born and raised in New Zealand. I went to high school, and after high school I actually studied to be an outdoor guide. And what this meant was it was a 2-year education in rock climbing, kayaking, and in New Zealand what we call tramping. Okay, other people might know this as hiking. And the idea was to produce confident outdoor leaders that could take other people on adventures in the outdoors. I loved working in the outdoors. I loved being a guide. I ended up working on the Franz Josef Glacier on the west coast of the South Island of New Zealand for many years, actually, on and off. I've traveled the world. I worked as a guide in Canada for several seasons in Whistler, BC. And when I wasn't working as an outdoor guide, I spent every minute climbing on rocks. I was completely obsessed with rock climbing, and I traveled the world for 6 years climbing on rocks. At the end of the 6 years, I was 27 and I was tired. I was living in Germany at the time. I went back to New Zealand and decided that it was time to make something of myself. It was time to get a career, and it was time to get a proper education. I started at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, and decided to get a master's degree in geography. I was really interested in human geography and the way people and cultures interact with each other and with the environment, but I was fascinated by physical geography, and it wasn't very long into my degree that I discovered GIS. I still remember my first semester studying GIS or learning GIS, and I hated it. I hated every second of it. I didn't understand it. It was too much, it was complicated, and it was difficult. It wasn't until it came time to study for the final exam that I actually spent time in learning it and understanding it, and I enjoyed it, and I could see the potential in it. So I took every course I could in GIS and remote sensing. When I wasn't learning about GIS or remote sensing myself, I was helping out in the computer labs, teaching other people and helping them through the exercises that they needed to do for their semester. Now, this opened up a lot of opportunities for me. I ended up getting several scholarships and a job at a geospatial research center. So 5 years later, I was finished with my master's, and by that time I had met and married my wife, and we decided to move to Denmark. So now I've been living in Denmark for about 9 years now, and I've had several different jobs, all within the geospatial industry, as a consultant, as a specialist, doing different things, but all focused on GIS and geospatial. So that's my background, that's how I got here. So if we think now in terms of podcasting, why am I podcasting? I'm podcasting because, firstly, I really enjoy thinking about these things. I think thinking about the geospatial industry, where it's going, learning about the new technologies out there and what people are using them for and their use cases. I think it's fascinating, and I love podcasts. I listen to a lot myself, and I think it's amazing that you can just be sort of spoon-fed this information while you're doing other things. You know, while you're driving to work in the morning. If I had a dog, I could listen to podcasts while I'm walking my dog. I just think they're an incredible medium, a way of delivering information to people. Okay, so now we've kind of talked about those three things. The reason I have an accent is because I come from New Zealand. I have a master's in geography with a really strong focus on GIS and remote sensing. I have 9 years experience in the industry, working here in Denmark, and I started podcasting because I love podcasting and I'm fascinated by this industry. Okay, so the other thing I really wanted to talk about was what I've learnt along the way. Now, I've had access to a lot of really smart people doing lots of clever things, and it's been really interesting to get their views and perspectives on geospatial, where it's going, what's happening out there, and what we can expect to see in the future. So I just want to take the time now to sort of list off a few things that I personally have learnt along the way. Bear in mind, these are just my opinions, but I'd like to share them with you anyway. Okay, so I've got 2 things that really stand out for me after doing these interviews, after talking to these people. And the first one is how fragmented the geospatial industry has become. Now, some people will see this as a good thing and some people will see this as a bad thing. And when I talk about fragmentation, I think about all those companies out there that are becoming more and more specialized, more and more focused, and are solving really different problems. And we're sort of moving away from those 2 or 3 or 4 really big players to a whole bunch of small players that are really innovative in their field and are solving things in a whole new way. But they're only doing 1 or 2 things. They're very specialized. And that's in terms of if we think about the companies, the actors in the industry, but also in terms of that role, that geospatial specialist. Okay, and you could, and I tend to think of that kind of role as almost like a gatekeeper, and it was like a one-size-fits-all role, and there was an expectation, at least in my opinion, of people that had that role to do so many different things. They needed to maintain the spatial database, they needed to process the data, run the analysis, and also produce amazing cartographic output and communicate ideas. So for me, that was that one-size-fits-all role, and I see that as also being fragmented, and I see that as an opportunity. And when I think about this as an opportunity, I think about if you're just starting out in the industry, or if you've been in the industry for a long time, you have an opportunity to focus on something that you're really good at or you're really interested in, because there is a need for that geospatial communicator. There is a need for that person that is amazing at producing cartographic output. We need people that understand data, that can process large amounts of it. We need people that maintain databases. Now, again, some people will see this kind of fragmentation, this opportunity to specialize in a certain field as a threat. Some people will see it as an erosion of that GIS gatekeeper, that geospatial specialist. But again, for me, this is an opportunity. There is a lot of potential here, and I'm really excited about it. I don't think you no longer need to be a specialist programmer and a database expert and a cartographer. You can be one of those things if you want, or you can be all of them. I think there's a lot of room in this industry, and the idea that GIS is dead, I simply don't buy that. It's just changed. Okay, so that was my rant on the first thing, on what I see as being the fragmentation of the geospatial industry, and definitely in my eyes that there's a lot of potential there. Okay, so the other thing I've noticed when I've talked to people in the industry is that when I ask them, hey, what does the future look like? Where are we going with geospatial? What can we expect from mapping in the future, and what's going to be important? Overwhelmingly, the answer is more. We're going to see more maps. We're going to see more geospatial. We're going to need more of this. And I think that's because we're collecting more and more data. That great statistic that says that 80% of all data has a geospatial component. Yeah, well, I think we're only going to collect more data in the future. And sure, access to that data is going to become easier and easier. And we're moving away from those gatekeepers that were the only ones that could access this data to everyone will be able to do it. But also, I think that there's a huge opportunity here. I think that with access to data becoming easier and easier, and better tools becoming available so people can work with this data I think we're going to see a whole bunch of new people showing up and solving interesting geospatial problems. And I don't think these people are necessarily going to have that traditional background in geography or GIS or remote sensing. I think they're just going to show up and they're going to say, hey, I've got an interesting problem. They're going to access the data and they're going to do it. And they're going to do it in a way that those of us that have been in the industry for a while might not have seen or thought about before. And I think it's gonna be a really interesting time. Okay, so that was my little rant about the couple of things that I've learned along the way throughout this process of interviewing people and publishing these podcasts. Now I want to move on to a few housekeeping messages that I would like to share with you. Firstly, I'll be taking a break from publishing podcasts for the next couple of weeks because it's holiday time here in Denmark, so me and my family, we're going to be on holiday for the next few weeks, and therefore I will not be publishing podcasts. But I will be back, and I have a whole bunch of great guests lined up, and I've actually recorded a few episodes, so I will continue doing this. Secondly, I really want to say thanks. This has been a really incredible process for me, a really, really interesting journey, meeting these people, publishing these interviews, and learning all the technical stuff around producing a podcast. And I really appreciate your feedback and your comments. And also want to remind you that if you haven't done already, you are more than welcome to reach out to me on social media. That's at Mapscaping at Facebook and Twitter, and map_view on Instagram. And the last item on my housekeeping list, that is just to remind you that I would really appreciate it if you would share this podcast. If you know someone who might enjoy this kind of content, it would be much appreciated if you would share this with them. And also, if you have any companies or any suggestions as to who I might interview in the future, I would also really appreciate that. So that's it from me for the next few weeks. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this. I really appreciate it. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, enjoy the summer. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, I hope the winter isn't too hard. And I will be back in a couple of weeks' time with more great content. See you then. Bye. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to talk about is GIS. And GIS, some people think it stands for Geographic Information Systems, and other people are convinced that it's Geographic Information Science. Now, I have a couple of different views on this, but one of them is definitely that GIS is not the mission, it is the medium. And when I was studying and learning about GIS and remote sensing in the University of Canterbury, I was convinced that it was the mission. I loved it. I was fascinated by it. I thought there were so many shiny different things to play with and link together and create with that I thought this was great. This was the mission for me. I was doing GIS for the sake of GIS because I was fascinated by it and I enjoyed it and I could see a lot of potential in it. But I think that I forgot along the way that the mission, that this was just, that GIS is the medium. It's the way we do things. It's a lens that we use to look at the world with, to do analysis with, to communicate our ideas with. So one of the other things I've learned is that spatial is no longer special. Now, again, back to my university days, people would say that spatial was special. You know, that spatial data, geospatial data, and geospatial processes, they were something special. Not everyone had access to them, and you needed to have an education in this to be able to work with this data, to understand it, and to be able to produce things with it. But this is no longer the case. Spatial is expected. It's baked into the things that we do, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Location is such an important part of the data that we collect that around 80% of all data has a spatial component. And this might not even be a lat long or a GPS location. This could just as easily be in relation to something else, but it has a location, and that location puts it in a greater context, in the same way time does. We don't talk about time data sets, we talk about data sets that have a time component, and this is the same with geospatial. And I think this is a really important way to think about geospatial because it removes that ownership of geospatial from us, the professionals that are working in the field, and gives everybody else access to it. Because we don't own data. Everyone has access to data, and we need to see geospatial as just a component of the data that everyone has access to. Another thing that's been quite obvious when I've been talking to these different people that are working in the industry and creating these amazing tools is that when I ask them, what is the future of geospatial? What is the future of mapping? Overwhelmingly the answer is more geospatial. And that sounds like a silly conclusion to come to, but when you think about it, we're collecting more and more data. Like I said just before, about 80% of all data has that spatial component. So with more and more data being collected out there, we're going to have more and more geospatial. Location is going to become more and more important. And why do we need spatial data? Well, again, it gives us context to the data. It puts it in perspective. It puts it in a bigger picture. And it's also a fantastic way of segmenting and personalizing things, experiences, analysis. It gives us another resolution. So when I've been talking to all these people that are doing this amazing work, one of the questions I often ask them is, hey, what's the future of geospatial? What's the future of mapping? Where is this going? And overwhelmingly, the answer is more geospatial. And on the face of it, it seems like a funny sort of answer to that question. But if you think about it, we're collecting more and more data. Like I said earlier, that data has, or 80% of all data has a location attached to it. Now, again, not necessarily a lat long, but maybe just a on this street. This data belongs to this street. This data is attached to this house here. Or we're just close to another object. So there could be inferred location. Anyway, we're collecting more data. This data has a geospatial location. And if you think of it in terms of communication, like we're using it to personalize things. And this is one of the things I'm most excited about in the geospatial industry and mapping in general, is this idea of personalization, of controlling an experience or delivering an experience that is more relevant to people via maps. And I think personally we've got a long way to go in this field. If you think about the search you do on Google, you're searching for a word, a term, a website, some information. That result that's delivered to you is based on your location, it's based on all the other things that Google knows about you, and it's based on your search history. And I'm sure it's based on 1,000 other things. But go to a Google map, for example, or maps in general, it's often a pre-rendered map. It doesn't react to you, it doesn't personalize you, it doesn't show things that are relative or relevant to you. And I think this is one of the most exciting things for me in terms of mapping, is this opportunity to use maps to personalize experiences. And to personalize that communication. You know, if you're running in a business, you wouldn't send emails out to people saying, hey, we're doing this in Spain, if all your customers were living in England. Okay, so that's a little bit about who I am, where I come from, why I'm doing this, and some of the things I've learnt along the way. I hope that's been interesting. I hope it's added some sort of value to you, and thank you. And I just want to take this opportunity to say thanks so much for listening. Okay, so one of the things I've learnt on this journey through talking to people that are working in the industry is that GIS or geospatial is not the mission itself, it's the medium, it's a way of communicating, and it's often that end result that's the important thing. And I really feel like we could do a much better job as an industry, as people that are interested in mapping and geospatial technology, of communicating that to people, of getting the message out there, of telling people, hey, this is what you can use this thing for. I was talking to someone recently, and I asked him, hey, so what companies are you most inspired by? He named a few companies, and then he said, but unfortunately this one company, a lot of the things they did, they seemed much more like tech demos than actual useful maps. And I think that's a real shame, and I think there's a lot of that kind of thing out there. I think a lot of us sort of get trapped into that shiny object syndrome where, hey, this is new, this is exciting, and we forget to say, yeah, but how does it work? how are we going to take these other people along on the journey? How are we going to provide value to our audience with this thing here? And it might be exciting and shiny for us in the industry that understands how it works and can see the potential of it. But then we need to go out and tell other people about it. And at least in my experience working in the industry, I think that the role of that salesperson, of that person that can communicate these ideas, that can be the bridge between the technical community and the end user, I think that that's a role that needs to be filled. After having worked in the industry for a while now, and after doing these podcasts and interviews with people that are also in the industry, I've realized that that spatial is no longer considered to be something special. It's just a component of the data, in the same way time is. It puts the data in context, and it is becoming more and more accessible to more and more people. Now, some people in the industry will see this as a threat to their jobs. They'll see it as an erosion of their skill set and a fragmentation of that GIS role, that GIS person that most organizations had or still have, that did a little bit of everything, that did the data processing, that maintained the database, that also did the analysis, that also made the maps. And I think what we're going to see in the future is that fragmentation continue, and we're going to have people that are really amazing at producing cartographic output. We're going to have more and more programmers that are specialized in the geospatial world. We're going to have people that are amazing at running analysis, but analysis in a context, in a greater context. They're going to have subject matter knowledge in other areas as well. And in general, we're going to see more and more people using and understanding geospatial data. And I think too, although this may appear like an invasion on some people's little kingdoms, in the grand scheme of things, this is going to be a great boost for our industry. Okay, so that's it. Now you know a little bit more about me. You know a little bit more about my background and why I'm doing this. You've listened to a little rant there about the things that I've learnt along the way, along this podcasting journey, through the interviews that I've had with these people. I hope it's provided some value. And now I'd like to move on to the last sort of topic on the list, and that was a few sort of housekeeping things I wanted to mention. Firstly, I just really want to thank you for all your questions and comments that I received through social media. And remember, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at Mapscaping on Facebook and Twitter, and map_view on Instagram. You can also visit our website, mapscaping.com, and find our email address. Flick us an email. I'll do my best to answer. So it's the summer holidays here in Denmark, and that means that our little family will be on holiday for the next few weeks, and I'll be taking a break from producing and publishing these podcasts for 2 or 3 weeks. But I have some great guests lined up, and I've already recorded a few podcasts, so In 2 or 3 weeks, I'll be ready to go again with new episodes. In the meantime, you're more than welcome to check out some of the previous episodes. I think there's 18 or 19 there, and some really interesting stuff, I think. So check that out, please. If you have any requests, if you know of any companies or people that you think would be really great guests and had a lot of value to give, then please share them with me. I'd be more than happy to reach out to them and see if we can't organize a time for an interview.